The desert highway stretched endlessly into the Arizona night, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Sonoran wilderness under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch in the thin desert air. Interstate 10 between Phoenix and Tucson carried thousands of vehicles daily, commuters heading home from late shifts, tourists driving through the Southwest, and the steady stream of 18-wheelers that formed the backbone of American commerce, their diesel engines humming through the darkness as they carried everything from consumer electronics to fresh produce across the vast distances of the American West. The landscape on either side of the highway was harsh and unforgiving. Saguaro cacti standing like ancient sentinels, their arms raised against the night sky, while creosote bushes and palo verde trees created a wilderness that had claimed countless lives over the centuries. This was country where a wrong turn could mean death from exposure, where drug smugglers and human traffickers moved through networks of dirt roads that predated the interstate system, and where the Mexican border lay just 60 miles to the south, like a shimmering line of heat and danger. On most nights, it was just another anonymous stretch of road where truckers pushed through the darkness toward distant destinations, their CB radios crackling with conversations about traffic conditions, truck stops, and the endless rhythm of life on the road. The truck stops that dotted the route were oases of neon light and diesel fuel, places where drivers could grab coffee, a hot meal, and a few hours of sleep before continuing their journeys across the American continent. But on March 17, 2022, this lonely highway would become the setting for one of the most audacious cargo thefts in recent criminal history. A theft that would trigger a massive federal manhunt involving agencies from the FBI to the DEA to Homeland Security, exposed sophisticated cartel infiltration of American logistics companies that had been operating undetected for years, and leave investigators with a mystery they're still trying to solve 3 years later. The story begins with Jake Morales, a man whose life exemplified the American working class dream and its limitations. At 42, Jake possessed the weathered appearance and quiet demeanor of someone who had spent countless hours alone in a truck cab, watching the landscape roll by while listening to talk radio, country music, and the CB chatter that connected drivers across the vast distances of interstate highways. His face bore the lines that came from squinting into sunrise and sunset. His hands were calloused from handling freight and wrestling with truck equipment, and his posture reflected the constant vibration and tension of professional driving. Jake had been born in Tucson to parents who worked in the service industry. His father as a mechanic at a Caterpillar dealership, his mother as a cashier at a Walmart supercenter. He learned the value of steady work and honest wages, but also understood the limitations that came with jobs that paid hourly rather than offering real opportunities for advancement. After high school, Jake had tried community college for 2 semesters, studying automotive technology with dreams of opening his own repair shop, but financial pressures and family obligations had forced him to find work that paid immediately rather than investing in long-term education. Trucking had offered Jake what seemed like a perfect solution: decent pay, the freedom of the open road, and work that utilized his mechanical aptitude while allowing him to see the country. He obtained his commercial driver's license at 27 and spent the next 15 years covering millions of miles across the American Southwest, hauling everything from construction equipment to refrigerated produce, learning the highways and truck stops and way stations that form the infrastructure of American commerce. His colleagues knew him as reliable, professional, and intensely private, exactly the kind of driver that dispatchers trusted with high-value loads and tight delivery schedules. Jake never missed deliveries, never had accidents, never caused problems with customers or law enforcement. His driving record was spotless, his equipment was always properly maintained, and his logbooks were meticulously accurate. In an industry where many drivers struggled with substance abuse, traffic violations, or mechanical problems, Jake represented the gold standard of professional trucking. For years, Jake had hauled freight across the Southwest without incident, moving through the vast network of highways that connected American cities to international borders and distribution centers. Produced from California's Central Valley, destined for supermarkets in Texas and Florida, manufactured goods from factories in Mexico bound for retail stores across the American West, electronics and automotive parts moving between assembly plants and distribution warehouses. consumer goods flowing from ports of entry to the retail centers that supplied American consumers with products from around the world. It was honest work that paid decent money for someone willing to spend weeks away from home, sleeping in truck stops and eating at roadside diners, dealing with traffic congestion and weather delays and the constant pressure to maintain delivery schedules that seemed designed more for computers than human beings. Jake earned approximately $65,000 annually, enough to support himself and send money to his elderly mother, but not enough to build the kind of financial security that would allow him to retire comfortably or weather major financial emergencies. But one shipment would change everything, transforming a reliable long-haul trucker who had never so much as received a speeding ticket into one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives, and triggering a chain of events that would expose the sophisticated methods cartels use to move money through legitimate American businesses while avoiding detection by law enforcement agencies. The Sinaloa cartel had been using American trucking companies to transport high-value shipments for over 5 years, exploiting the massive volume of legitimate cross-border commerce to disguise criminal operations that moved hundreds of millions of dollars annually through the American transportation system. The operation was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. Drug proceeds were carefully packaged and hidden within legitimate cargo, then transported by truck drivers who in most cases had no idea they were carrying anything other than routine commercial freight. The cartel's logistics network had evolved over decades from crude smuggling operations into a sophisticated enterprise that rivaled legitimate multinational corporations in its organizational complexity. They employed teams of logistics specialists, transportation experts, and technology professionals who understood American commerce systems better than many legitimate businesses. Their operation included corrupted employees within trucking companies, freight brokers, customs facilities, and even law enforcement agencies who ensured that specific loads received minimal inspection while appearing to follow all standard shipping and security procedures. The system had been developed through careful study of how legitimate businesses move goods across international borders, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited while maintaining the appearance of normal commercial activity. Cartel operatives spent years learning about trucking regulations, customs procedures, and law enforcement methods, developing countermeasures that allowed criminal proceeds to flow through the American transportation system with minimal risk of detection. The operation focused specifically on produce shipments, taking advantage of the fact that fresh fruits and vegetables required expedited processing to prevent spoilage during transport. Customs officials were naturally reluctant to delay perishable goods for detailed inspection, especially when documentation appeared proper and shipping manifests matched legitimate commercial orders. This created perfect cover for transporting large amounts of cash, disguised as routine agricultural commerce flowing between Mexican farms and American distribution centers. The cartel had identified dozens of trucking companies that specialized in refrigerated transport, gradually infiltrating their operations through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and the recruitment of employees who were vulnerable due to financial pressure or personal problems. The infiltration was sophisticated and gradual, with cartel operatives spending months or even years building relationships with key personnel before revealing the true nature of their interests. Jake's employer, Southwest Logistics Solutions, operated a fleet of 150 refrigerated trailers that specialized in transporting produce from Mexico farms to American distribution centers across Texas, California, and the southwestern states. The company had built an excellent reputation over 15 years of operation, maintaining on-time delivery rates above 95% and earning contracts with major grocery chains and food service companies that demanded reliable transportation for their perishable inventory. Southwest Logistics had never been suspected of any connection to criminal activity, and company executives genuinely believed they were operating a legitimate business that provided essential services to the American food distribution system. But federal investigation would later reveal that several employees at various levels of the organization had been accepting payments to ensure that specific shipments received special handling while avoiding the kind of detailed scrutiny that might reveal their true contents. The infiltration was so sophisticated that most employees remained unaware that their company was being used for criminal purposes. Cartel operatives identified personnel who could be corrupted through financial pressure, personal problems, or simply greed, then gradually recruited them into a network that facilitated the movement of criminal proceeds while maintaining the appearance of normal business operations. Dispatchers learned to assign certain loads to specific drivers without asking questions about the cargo or destination. Loading dock supervisors developed selective blindness when it came to examining certain shipments too closely. Even some drivers had been recruited to ensure that particular loads received careful handling and prompt delivery without curiosity about why these shipments seemed more important than routine commercial freight. The recruitment process was carefully managed to minimize risk while maximizing the cartel's control over key transportation assets. Potential recruits were approached gradually, often through intermediaries who presented the opportunity as legitimate business that simply required discretion rather than actual criminal activity. Many participants never fully understood the scope of the operation or their role in facilitating major money laundering activities. Jake had been driving for Southwest Logistics for 8 years, building a reputation as one of their most reliable long-haul operators. His routes typically covered the corridor between Mexican border crossings and major distribution centers in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and occasionally cities as far east as New Orleans or as far west as Los Angeles. He knew the highways, truck stops, way stations, and customs facilities better than almost any other driver in the company's fleet. His experience and reliability had earned him assignments for high-priority loads that required careful handling and prompt delivery. Dispatchers trusted Jake with temperature-sensitive cargo that could spoil if transportation was delayed, valuable shipments that required extra security precautions, and loads bound for customers who demanded absolute punctuality. This trust would ultimately provide Jake with access to the criminal shipment that would change his life forever. The specific load that Jake was assigned on March 17, 2022, appeared to be completely routine, according to all available documentation. The manifest listed the cargo as frozen avocados, destined for Lone Star-produced distribution in East Dallas, a legitimate business that supplied restaurants and grocery stores throughout Texas with fresh and frozen fruits and vegetables imported from Mexico and Central America. The paperwork was perfect. Proper bills of lading, customs declarations, and refrigeration requirements that justified expedited processing through border checkpoints and transportation corridors. The shipping documents listed the cargo's value at $85,000, consistent with legitimate produce shipments of similar size and weight. Temperature monitoring requirements specified that the load must be maintained at precisely 32 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent spoilage during the 900-mile journey from Nogales to Dallas. But hidden within the legitimate cargo were cash-stuffed duffel bags worth $10.7 million, representing months of drug sales across the southwestern United States that needed to be transported back to Mexico for laundering through the cartel's financial networks. The money was vacuum-sealed in waterproof packages and arranged within actual produce containers to defeat both X-ray inspection and physical examination by customs officials who might conduct spot checks during border processing. The concealment was sophisticated enough to defeat standard inspection procedures while maintaining the illusion of legitimate commercial cargo. Actual avocados formed the top layers of each container, with the cash packages arranged beneath in configurations that match the weight distribution and thermal characteristics of frozen produce. Even if customs officers opened containers for inspection, they would find genuine avocados in proper temperature maintenance, with the hidden money virtually undetectable without systematic unpacking of the entire load. The FBI would later uncover extensive cartel infiltration of several Arizona-based logistics companies, revealing a network that had been moving an estimated $500 million annually through the American trucking system, while avoiding detection by law enforcement agencies that focused on traditional smuggling methods rather than the sophisticated exploitation of legitimate commercial transportation. Jake's load represented just one component of an operation that used hundreds of trucks, dozens of trucking companies, and thousands of legitimate shipments to transport criminal proceeds back to Mexico for laundering through networks that converted drug money into legitimate business investments, real estate purchases, and financial instruments that could be used anywhere in the global economy. In the days leading up to the March 17th haul, Jake began exhibiting behavior that would only seem significant in retrospect, but which suggested careful preparation for a major life change rather than the routine preparation for another long-haul assignment. Bank records that federal investigators would later examine in detail showed that Jake had systematically withdrawn his entire savings account, approximately $15,000 accumulated over several years of careful budgeting, in cash over 3 days, making multiple small withdrawals from different ATMs across Phoenix to avoid triggering the federal reporting requirements that applied to transactions over $10,000. The withdrawal pattern suggested someone who understood banking regulations and was deliberately attempting to avoid creating records that might later be examined by law enforcement agencies. Jake visited 12 different ATMs over 72 hours, never withdrawing more than $800 at any single location, and using machines at different banks to further obscure the pattern of his activities. This level of operational security was unusual for someone who had never displayed interest in criminal activity and suggested that Jake had researched methods for moving money without attracting official attention. Jake also purchased 2 burner phones from different electronics stores, paying cash and providing false identification information when asked to complete warranty registration forms. The phones were basic models without GPS tracking or advanced features, selected specifically for their ability to provide communication capabilities, while minimizing the electronic trail that law enforcement agencies could use to track his movements or monitor his communications. The phones were purchased 3 days apart at stores in different parts of Phoenix, with Jake using different false names and addresses for each transaction. This demonstrated planning and operational security awareness that was inconsistent with his previous behavior and suggested that Jake was preparing for activities that would require avoiding law enforcement surveillance. Jake used the cash he had withdrawn to pay off outstanding debts that had been accumulating over several months of financial pressure. His truck payment, which had been 3 months behind, was brought current with a single cash payment to the dealership's finance department. Credit card balances totaling over $8,000 were paid in full through money orders purchased at different convenience stores. Back rent on his Phoenix apartment, which had reached the point where his landlord was threatening eviction proceedings, was settled with a cash payment that covered both outstanding balances and 2 months in advance. To neighbors and acquaintances, it appeared that Jake had received an unexpected windfall, perhaps a bonus payment, insurance settlement, or inheritance that allowed him to clear his financial obligations and get his life back on track. Several people commented that Jake seemed more relaxed and optimistic than he had been in months, as if a major source of stress had been removed from his life. But Jake's behavior suggested someone preparing for a major life change or extended absence, rather than someone who had simply solved his financial problems. He closed his post office box, canceling the mail service he had maintained for several years to ensure that he received important documents even when he was on the road for extended periods. He gave notice to his apartment complex that he would not be renewing his lease when it expired at the end of March, telling the property manager that he had decided to try over-the-road driving that would keep him away from Phoenix for months at a time. Most significantly, Jake sold his personal vehicle, a 2018 Ford F-150 pickup truck that represented his most valuable asset outside of his commercial driving equipment, to a used car dealer for $22,000 cash. The truck had been his pride and joy, meticulously maintained and used for weekend trips to visit family and friends when he wasn't working. Selling it suggested that Jake was planning either to be away from Phoenix indefinitely or that he needed additional cash for purposes that he couldn't accomplish through normal banking channels. The most significant evidence of Jake's advanced planning and possible criminal intent came from surveillance footage at a Phoenix truck stop 3 days before his scheduled pickup of the fateful load. Security cameras captured Jake meeting with a man later identified by federal investigators as Roberto Vega, a mid-level operative in the Sinaloa Cartel's Phoenix money laundering network who had been under sporadic FBI surveillance for over 2 years. The meeting took place at Annie's Truck Stop, a 24-hour facility on the outskirts of Phoenix that catered to long-haul drivers with diesel fuel, restaurants, showers, and sleeping facilities. The truck stop was a natural meeting place where Jake's presence would seem completely normal and where 2 men having coffee and conversation would attract no attention from other customers or employees. The meeting lasted approximately 20 minutes, with both men appearing to engage in serious conversation while drinking coffee at a corner table in the truck stop restaurant. Surveillance footage showed Jake taking notes on a small pad of paper, while Vega appeared to be providing detailed information or instructions. Body language analysis by FBI specialists suggested that Jake was receiving information rather than providing it, and that he was initially surprised or shocked by whatever Vega was telling him. Federal investigators believe this was when Jake learned about the cash hidden in his assigned trailer and made the decision to steal the shipment rather than deliver it as scheduled. The timing of the meeting, combined with Jake's subsequent financial activities in preparation for departure, strongly suggests that the theft was planned rather than a spur-of-the-moment decision made after discovering the money during routine transportation. Phone records recovered after Jake's disappearance showed multiple calls between his burner phone and numbers associated with Vega's criminal network during the week following their truck stop meeting. The calls were brief, typically lasting less than 2 minutes, and occurred at times when Jake would normally have been sleeping or off duty. The pattern suggested coordination and planning rather than casual conversation. Some investigators theorized that Jake was recruited as an asset who would steal the money and share the proceeds with corrupt cartel operatives who wanted to embezzle funds from their own organization. This would explain why Jake felt confident enough to attempt such a dangerous theft and why he seemed to have detailed information about the shipment's contents and value. Alternative theories suggest that Jake discovered the hidden cash through his own investigation and decided to gamble everything on a single high-stakes theft that would set him up financially for life. His 15 years of trucking experience had given him detailed knowledge of highway routes, border procedures, and law enforcement patterns that would be crucial for planning and executing such an operation. A third possibility is that Jake was coerced into the theft through threats against himself or family members, though no evidence has been found to support this theory. Jake had no known connections to criminal organizations before his contact with Vega, and family members have consistently denied receiving any threats or unusual approaches from unknown individuals. The preparation and planning that Jake demonstrated in the days before the theft suggests that he understood the enormous risks involved in stealing from a major cartel operation. The Sinaloa organization had a well-documented history of violent retaliation against anyone who threatened their operations, and Jake would have known that success required not just stealing the money, but disappearing completely before cartel enforcers could locate and eliminate him. His systematic approach to eliminating financial obligations, closing accounts, and preparing for departure suggests that Jake had no intention of returning to his previous life, regardless of the outcome of his theft attempt. This was not a desperate gamble by someone hoping to solve temporary financial problems, but a calculated decision to permanently abandon his identity and lifestyle in exchange for the chance to live as a wealthy fugitive. On the night of March 17, 2022, Jake's theft unfolded with precision that suggested extensive advanced planning rather than impulsive criminal behavior. At 2 a.m., his refrigerated trailer passed through a Border Patrol checkpoint on Interstate 19 near Amado, Arizona, approximately 40 miles north of the Mexican border. The inspection was routine, with Jake providing proper documentation and customs officials conducting only cursory examination of his cargo. GPS tracking devices installed in the trailer showed Jake's route proceeding normally toward Interstate 10, the major east-west highway that would carry him toward Dallas. But at 2:40 a.m., the truck abruptly deviated from its assigned route, taking an unmarked exit that led into the desert wilderness east of Tucson. The exit led to a network of dirt roads used primarily by ranchers and Border Patrol agents, providing access to remote areas where illegal activity could occur without observation. Jake's knowledge of these routes suggested either extensive preparation or assistance from accomplices familiar with the area's geography and law enforcement patrol patterns. GPS signals showed the truck stopping for exactly 2 hours near an abandoned warehouse complex that had once served the mining industry but had been deserted for over a decade. The location was strategically chosen, far enough from major highways to avoid casual observation, but accessible to vehicles capable of handling rough terrain. Federal investigators believe Jake used this time to transfer the money from his trailer to another vehicle, possibly a pickup truck or SUV that could navigate desert roads more easily than an 18-wheeler. The precision of the timing suggested that Jake was working with accomplices who were waiting at the warehouse with transportation and possibly equipment needed to move the heavy duffel bags. When authorities finally located the trailer 12 hours later, it had been abandoned on a dirt road approximately 10 miles from the warehouse. The refrigeration unit was still running, and the legitimate produce cargo remained intact, but the hidden duffel bags containing $10.7 million in cash had vanished completely. The trailer showed no signs of forced entry or damage, indicating that whoever removed the money possessed keys or detailed knowledge of the locking mechanisms. This suggested either that Jake had provided access or that the theft involved cartel operatives with technical expertise in defeating security systems. The discovery of the theft triggered immediate response from multiple federal agencies who recognized that the missing cargo represented far more than routine commercial theft. The FBI's Phoenix field office assumed lead responsibility for the investigation, coordinating with DEA agents who had been monitoring cartel money laundering operations and Homeland Security investigators with expertise in cross-border criminal networks. Southwest Logistics Solutions reported the missing shipment after Jake failed to make scheduled check-in calls and didn't arrive at the Dallas distribution center as planned. Company executives initially assumed mechanical problems or driver illness had delayed the delivery, but GPS tracking data revealed that the truck had deviated from its assigned route hours earlier. When FBI agents contacted Jake's emergency contact numbers, they discovered that his Phoenix apartment was empty, and his landlord had received 30 days' notice that Jake would not be renewing his lease. His personal vehicle was missing from its assigned parking space, and neighbors reported that Jake had been loading boxes into his truck throughout the previous week. Bank records showed that Jake had withdrawn $18,000 in cash from ATMs across Phoenix during the 48 hours following the theft, using multiple machines to avoid detection while systematically emptying his accounts. The withdrawal locations created a pattern suggesting movement toward the Mexican border, though Jake was careful to avoid creating a direct trail that investigators could easily follow. The realization that Jake's cargo contained cartel money rather than legitimate produce created immediate urgency within federal law enforcement. Drug cartels responded to theft with extreme violence, and the $10.7 million loss would certainly trigger retaliation against anyone connected to the shipment or its transportation. The cartel's response to Jake's theft was swift, systematic, and terrifying in its implications for anyone connected to the transportation operation. Within 48 hours of discovering the missing money, FBI sources began reporting the arrival of cartel enforcers in Arizona. Professional killers and interrogators whose reputation for violence had been established through decades of eliminating threats to the organization's operations across Mexico and the southwestern United States. Phone intercepts by federal agencies revealed communications between Sinaloa operatives discussing the missing money and planning systematic investigation of everyone who had been involved in the shipment's preparation, loading, and transportation. The tone of these communications made absolutely clear that the organization viewed the theft as an act of war that required immediate and violent response, not just to recover the money, but to send messages to anyone else who might consider betraying the cartel's trust. The conversations intercepted by law enforcement agencies provided chilling insights into the cartel's operational mindset and their standard procedures for dealing with security breaches. References were made to cleaning house, sending messages, and making examples of anyone who might have been involved in or had knowledge of the theft. The organization's leadership was clearly prepared to accept significant collateral damage in their pursuit of the missing money and punishment of those responsible. Local law enforcement agencies across southern Arizona received urgent warnings about possible cartel activity, including detailed descriptions of vehicles and individuals who might be conducting surveillance or gathering intelligence about the missing shipment. Border Patrol agents were alerted to watch for suspicious activity that might indicate cartel operatives crossing into the United States to conduct retaliation operations against American citizens. The warnings were based on specific intelligence about cartel methods and capabilities that federal agencies had developed through years of monitoring their operations. The Sinaloa organization maintained networks of operatives throughout the American Southwest who could be activated for special operations, including surveillance, intimidation, and elimination of threats to their criminal enterprises. Within 72 hours of the theft, multiple reports began coming in about suspicious individuals asking questions at truck stops, freight terminals, and driver gathering places throughout Arizona. The questions focused on Jake Morales specifically, his background, work habits, financial situation, personal relationships, and possible accomplices who might have helped him plan or execute the theft. The questioning was conducted with the kind of systematic thoroughness that suggested professional intelligence gathering rather than casual inquiry. Individuals were asked not just about Jake himself, but about his family members, friends, financial problems, recent behavior changes, and any conversations he might have had about money troubles or plans to leave Arizona. Several truck drivers reported being approached by well-dressed men who claimed to be private investigators working for an insurance company, asking detailed questions about Jake's routes, schedule, and contacts within the trucking industry. The questioning was professional and non-threatening, but the level of detail sought and the resources being devoted to the investigation clearly indicated that this was not routine insurance fraud investigation. The trucking company's CEO, dispatch managers, and loading dock supervisors were placed under federal protection after receiving death threats that investigators traced to cartel-affiliated phone numbers in Mexico and Southern California. The threats were specific and credible, including detailed information about the target's home addresses, family members, and daily routines that could only have been obtained through sophisticated surveillance operations. Southwest Logistics Solutions immediately hired private security firms to protect key personnel and their families, while also implementing enhanced security measures at their terminals and administrative offices. Several employees resigned immediately upon learning that they had been unknowingly involved in transporting criminal proceeds, fearing that they would be targeted for retaliation despite their complete innocence of any wrongdoing. The company's insurance carriers were notified of the theft and the subsequent security threats, leading to immediate increases in premiums and requirements for additional security measures that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement. The financial impact on Southwest Logistics extended far beyond the immediate loss of the stolen cargo, threatening the company's viability as a legitimate business. Interviews with workers at the Nogales Freight Terminal revealed that cartel representatives had been systematically questioning employees about Jake's background, work habits, and possible accomplices in the theft. The questioning was conducted by individuals who identified themselves as representatives of the shipping company's insurance carrier, but their methods and the depth of their investigation clearly indicated professional criminal intelligence gathering. Workers reported being asked about Jake's financial situation, recent changes in his behavior, conversations about money problems, and any indication that he might have been planning to leave Arizona or change his lifestyle. The questioners were particularly interested in whether Jake had shown signs of having access to unexpected money or had made any preparations for extended travel. Several employees reported feeling intimidated by the questioning, even though no direct threats were made. The questioners displayed knowledge about workers' personal lives, family situations, and financial circumstances that could only have been obtained through extensive surveillance and background investigation. The systematic nature of the cartel's response demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of American business practices and their ability to operate within legitimate commercial environments without attracting immediate law enforcement attention. Their investigation methods paralleled those used by legitimate private investigators and corporate security firms, making it difficult for law enforcement agencies to intervene without clear evidence of criminal activity. Federal investigators believe Jake fled to Mexico within days of the theft, possibly using false documentation or crossing the border illegally through remote areas to avoid detection by customs officials who would be watching for his identity. The timing of his disappearance and the pattern of his final electronic communications suggested that he had pre-planned escape routes and methods for avoiding law enforcement surveillance. Phone records show Jake's last known location as Sasabe, Arizona, a small border town with numerous unofficial crossing points that smugglers frequently use to enter Mexico undetected. The town sits directly on the international border and has a long history as a crossing point for both legitimate travelers and individuals seeking to avoid official border controls. The area around Sasabe contains dozens of dirt roads and desert paths that provide access to Mexico without passing through official border checkpoints. These routes are dangerous and require knowledge of desert survival techniques, but they offer the possibility of crossing into Mexico without creating official records that law enforcement agencies could use to track fugitives. Mexican authorities were immediately notified of Jake's fugitive status and provided with detailed information about his background, physical description, and possible destinations within Mexico. But the vast territory of northern Mexico contains thousands of remote communities where someone with adequate funding could hide indefinitely without attracting government attention or creating records that American investigators could access. The cooperation between American and Mexican law enforcement agencies in fugitive cases had improved significantly in recent years, but practical limitations remain substantial. Mexican authorities had limited resources for tracking American fugitives in remote areas, and their priorities necessarily focused on Mexican citizens and crimes committed within Mexican territory. The FBI issued a comprehensive wanted bulletin for Jake Morales, charging him with interstate theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to traffic cartel assets. The charges carried potential sentences of over 20 years in federal prison, reflecting both the serious nature of his alleged crimes and the government's determination to prevent similar incidents that could encourage other American workers to steal from criminal organizations. The wanted bulletin was distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout North America and included detailed information about Jake's background, work history, physical appearance, and known associates. Copies were also provided to American consulates and embassies throughout Latin America, with instructions to be alert for any American citizens matching Jake's description who might attempt to obtain replacement travel documents. Despite the extensive manhunt and cooperation with Mexican law enforcement agencies, Jake hasn't been definitively spotted since his apparent border crossing 3 years ago. The investigation has generated hundreds of reported sightings across Mexico, Central America, and even some locations within the United States, but none have been verified through follow-up investigation or resulted in arrest warrants being served successfully. Several unconfirmed sightings have placed Jake in communities across Sonora and Sinaloa states, but the reports have been inconsistent and often contradictory. Some witnesses describe a man matching Jake's general physical description, working in construction or mechanical repair shops in small towns near the coast. Others report seeing someone similar operating small businesses or living quietly in rural communities, where American expatriates are not uncommon. The most credible reports have come from areas near the Gulf of California, where Jake's mechanical skills and trucking experience would be valuable for legitimate employment that wouldn't require extensive background verification or official documentation. The region's economy includes fishing, agriculture, and small-scale manufacturing operations that frequently employ workers without asking detailed questions about their backgrounds or legal status. But the challenge of verifying these sightings in remote areas of Mexico has proven nearly impossible for American law enforcement agencies operating with limited resources and jurisdictional constraints. Mexican authorities have been cooperative within the bounds of their capabilities, but tracking individual fugitives in vast rural territories requires resources that are typically reserved for cases involving Mexican nationals or crimes committed within Mexican borders. Some federal investigators theorize that Jake may be living under cartel protection in exchange for sharing the stolen money with the organization he robbed. This theory gains support from the fact that no violent retaliation has been reported against Jake personally, despite the cartel's well-documented track record of eliminating anyone who threatens their operations or steals their assets. The $10.7 million that Jake stole has never been recovered, and investigators have found no evidence of the money entering legitimate financial systems anywhere in North America. The bill's serial numbers were not recorded before the theft, making them impossible to trace through normal banking channels, even if Jake attempted to deposit, exchange, or invest portions of the stolen currency. Jake Morales, last seen March 17, 2022, $10.7 million still missing, FBI reward active, case remains open.